Incorrect.
Today, would you please explain the basis for that statement?
What I said was I'd heard it shut down, and that's, the basis for that was I heard it was shut down.
That's wrong.
You are incorrect.
The statement I said was I heard it was shut down. That is a
That's
correct,
wrong statement.
that's not a wrong statement. I did hear that.
Your information is incorrect.
Okay, my information is correct, incorrect, and I stand corrected. If you tell me, now I've heard that Palisades is not shut down. So I don't know for a fact if Palisades is running for not. I've heard both ways. So Palisades may or may not have shut down. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Why do you think it is that NRC isn't doing the job that its regulations say it should?
I think the largest reason for that is the Congress. In 1997, 9 nuclear power plants in the United States, including the 2 at D.C. Cook, were shut down the entire year. That's roughly 10% of the U.S. fleet. The reason for that was NRC Chairman Shirley Jackson was enforcing the regulations. If you didn't meet the regulations, you were shut down. The industry didn't like that. The industry is the 4th largest political action campaign contributor to the United States Congress. They went to the NRC Congress and said, these guys are putting us out of business. On June 4th, 1998, I was sitting at the commission table across from the NRC chairman, whining about something. The NRC chairman interrupted me by pounding on the table and said, if you really believe that, you'd be up on Capitol Hill. I had no clue why she was upset this time. I found out later was that morning the Senate had threatened to cut the NRC's budget by 40%. The NRC avoided that budget cut by agreeing not to enforce federal safety regulations. The chairman left the commission because her integrity would not be challenged, but others took her place. But it's not, I'm not sure I blame the NRC for caving into that kind of pressure for somebody who threatens to fire you, or the people who did that. Congress let the American public down, kept the NRC from doing the job. I think that's the biggest reason why the NRC doesn't do that job. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you were, I was here at the meeting that Commissioner Chief Jessup last spring, and he was not told by NRC that there was an ongoing leak when he toured the plant, and when we sat down with him, none of us knew. So my question to NRC would be, what are the reporting requirements where the on-site NRC inspector must tell the NRC chief, who's there the day before, and they're the citizens, that they're going to be ongoing for 1 year, and he was not told. He, by the way, has been replaced because he was too policy. So that's
The-
the problem.
We looked at that event because it got a lot of attention. The reporting requirements did not require the plant to report that in that time frame. You have, depending on the severity of the problem or the discovery, you have very short, probably 15 minutes for security events, 4 hours for safety events, even longer for lesser safety events. And certain events don't even have to be, you have to fix them, but you don't have to report them. That event did not exceed the threshold for reporting, so there was no violation on the company's part for not reporting it. Politically, it might have been better had they voluntarily informed, but there was not a reporting violation for not having notified the chairman or others in that time frame. Other questions, comments? Yes, ma'am.
Southwest Coast Commissioner, why are we chosen to have 2 of these plants in such a close proximity?
The question was, why was this region selected for 2 nuclear power plants? I don't know the exact reasons for the company's reasons, but in general, the reason is proximity to the end users, who needs the electricity. One of the problems with power generation, whether it's nuclear or non-nuclear, is you lose about 10% of electricity as you transport it from the generator to the end user. You can minimize those losses by shortening the distance. You don't want to build nuclear power plants downtown because of too close to the populations. So generally you look for a balance between proximity to the population, the user of the electricity, access to water supplies because nuclear power plants need large amounts of cooling water, land costs, and other factors. So I don't know exactly what drove this owner to those choices, but in general that's what's driven choices elsewhere. I suspect I don't know how they weighted, but I suspect those same factors were in play here. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. And I'll come to you.
Yes.
The lady in red, a couple rows behind you, and now come forward.
I have a question about manpower. It is my understanding that the professors who teach nuclear science and nuclear engineering are declining in numbers and retiring, right? So that means that the number of future nuclear scientists and engineers will also be declining, which leads me to believe that we may have a safety concern in general terms about who's running a nuclear plant if you have only techs on site. Is that, am I correct in that assumption?
When I have a degree in nuclear engineering. When I went to college, there were 80 universities in the United States that provided that training. That's now down to about half of that, 40 or give or take a little. So there is a reduction. There's also, the other end of that is the ones that were cranked out, myself and my colleagues, are getting older. There actually are some older than me, so there are some that have already retired. And to deal with that reality, the industry and the NRC have been for years and are quickly expanding what are called knowledge management programs to prevent the brain drain. As qualified people leave, how do you capture that knowledge so that newcomers can learn from those mistakes and that knowledge rather than have to repeat it? So there are a lot of efforts underway to document what happened in the past. As far as whether there's just simply not enough people to man the computers and access those knowledge management systems, the NRC has regulations in place that require certain qualifications for doing certain jobs, for operators, for health physics technicians, for engineers, for welders, etc. Those qualifications have not changed. There are also supplemental requirements for how many people you need of these various qualifications. Those numbers have not changed. So if there's simply not enough people to do it, you either go out and find somebody to do it, which means you have to pay more to find that, or your plant will shut down. There are mechanisms. I share that concern. I see that data. That trend is disturbing, but I think those measures are backstops against that, leading to the unsafe conditions you're suggesting. So I think it's a valid concern, but I think there are things in place to protect us against that. You, sir, and then up there.
Yeah, I was going to say, insurance companies have actuarial tables. If I were to complain to my adjuster about my premiums being too high, and my argument would be based upon the fact that I've been driving 50 years with a perfect safety record, he might very well turn around and say to me, "You're due. You're going to have an accident." Managers do burn out. I think probably what happens is they get careless, like a man who runs a high-speed machine all day long. One little distraction, maybe he didn't have a decent breakfast in the morning, God knows what all. His attention is drawn away from the fact that he should be paying attention. It seems to me managers, maybe a lot of them have to be overseen by the higher-ups, the ones that are really responsible for the operation of the plant. Now, I don't know what happens with managers or the peers. Where do they live? They must live nearby or somewhere. I mean, it seems to me to be almost a contradiction in common sense that they would jeopardize themselves and their family and not appreciate the regulations. Now, maybe some regulations are so stringent and so maybe even considered stupid by some of these people. I know that happens in my OSHA. I worked in building trades. For example, on catwalks, you have to have a rail so high. I forget exactly why. But if you're an inch over or an inch under, you're in violation. Now, that's pretty silly. Common sense would dictate, well, higher. That's better than the requirement. But no, it's got to be exactly that height. You see what I'm getting at? It's just
Well, I think
the ones that are in charge ought to be the ones that are overseen most especially.
Right.
And there's no excuse for them not being held accountable when something is, a month is too long to have a violation go on and on.
I agree with that. So the first part of that was the managers and where do they live and would they tolerate something since they and their families live close by. That's true, but if you look at Fukishima and Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, they didn't happen because the workers were bussed in and they didn't care about their local communities. Those people lived in the communities too. They shared those concerns. They were among those that paid a price for the problem. So that's not, the one thing that they also addressed to the issue of fatigue or somebody been on the job too long. In recent years, within the last 5 years, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has imposed regulations on working hours to guard against fatigue. To complement those working hour limits and protection against fatigue by workers, they've also required that if something happens, a near miss of equipment, something happens, in the old days, the evaluation of what happened and why would focus in on the equipment, the hardware. What was this improperly lubricated, poorly maintained, etc. Now they look at, was fatigue an issue? Were the workers too tired to follow the procedures? Were the managers didn't know? You know, so that element is there. So it's a better way to flag emerging problems so that fixes can be implemented before fatigue or other factors can cause it. So I think that's a good measure. As far as the regulations, if a rule is deemed to be stupid, either by consensus or by minority, there is a provision in the regulations for an owner to challenge that rule, to either seek an exemption to the rule, a waiver from the rule, or to submit a petition for rulemaking to do away with the rule altogether, or revise it to some less stupid or perhaps even smart outcome. So if an owner feels that a regulation imposes a burden, they have mechanisms in place to do that. What the NRC and the owner should not do is simply wink, wink, nudge, nudge, ignore a regulation. That's not the right way to deal with that. By going through an exemption or a waiver or a rulemaking process, that would allow people who said that having a height requirement is to argue, well, here's why that requirement is needed for that catwalk. If it's a bogus reason, it can be evaluated and discarded. If it's a valid reason, then the existing regulations or requirement can be kept as said. So we think there's a mechanism built in the rules to deal with arbitrary and capricious regulation, and it should be exercised rather than negligence or ignoring a regulation. That's not the way to deal with violence. In our opinion, that's not the way to deal with those issues. Yes, sir. Thanks for your patience also.
Yes, same with the reactor embrittlement. If you're aware of this issue, I remember back in 2005 during the licensing hearing, they said that they would ameliorate the reactor in like 2009. Since then, that got moved to like 2012, like 2015, 2017. Last meeting I attended, they figured the reactor vessel didn't have an embrittlement problem, it was good forever. That's what they sort of lat on. Yeah. Are you aware of the reactor embrittlement problem, and can you clue us into where they really set?
My understanding of where that stands today is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has asked the company to show the agency why operation past 2017 is justified. The NRC has done some work in fairly recent years, the 2008 or 2009 timeframe, to look at that issue more broadly. They've identified some areas where additional, more sophisticated analysis might show there's more margin than was initially. Depending on how sophisticated a model you want to do, whether it's pencil and ink, slide rule, or very detailed computer analysis, the more sophisticated you can do, the less assumptions, the less uncertainty you have to factor in. When you're doing very simple calculations, you have to put in a lot of margin because you may not be right. What I'm told is that the methods currently done by the company for reactor vessel embrittlement have some uncertainty that suggests that operation past 2017 isn't supported. There's an opportunity for the company to do the more detailed analysis, remove some of that uncertainty, increase the margin, and support a longer date. Right now, that's not been done. The NRC is not convinced that operation past 2017 is supported. That doesn't mean that it's unsafe. It just means without that, the NRC reaching that conclusion at the moment that the agency is concerned about operation past 2017. To the credit of the agency, they very clearly communicated that to the company and said, we have this question, you need to provide this answer, or this. So it's really, the balls are now in the company's court to address the NRC's concern. I don't know how that outcome will be. In that case, my crystal ball is more like a bowling ball. I just don't know. Yes, ma'am.
I hope that you can all hear me. I moved to the back so that everybody hopefully can hear me. I live exactly between the two plants, DC Cook and Palisades, just outside of the 10-mile evacuation zone for each plant. And I've been concerned about the safety from each plant. In this day and age of climate change, when unknown weather events and earth events are happening at a more frequent basis, unexpected things happening, I hope that you can share the analogy that I'm going to share with you right now, but after Hurricane Sandy, I am sure that the people of New Jersey never expected to see their roller coaster that had been a part of their state for a long time, a mangled mess in the Atlantic Ocean. And I cannot shake that image knowing that we have nuclear waste storage casks on unstable, sandy shores of the greatest freshwater inland lake system in the world. And I cannot shake the image of those casks if we have an unusual weather event with 25-foot waves on the shores of Lake Michigan. If the water levels in the lake are high, are those casks going to end up in our Lake Michigan, contaminating the lake for years to come? I am very concerned about this, Mr. Lockbaum, and I don't know what to do about it.
Well, the good news, depends on how it plays out, but the potentially good news is that there is a recognition, a growing recognition, that the status quo of spent fuel storage in the United States is bad. Because of the Yucca Mountain impasse, President Obama formed a Blue Ribbon Commission that issued a report in January of 2012. We've met with 3 of the 4 senators that are drafting legislation expected to be out at the end of this month to deal with the Blue Ribbon Commission report recommendations. Some of those recommendations deal with the fact that dry casks are currently being stored on site in places that they really should not be. They proposed forming 1 or more central or consolidated interim storage sites to move the dry cask from those locations elsewhere. There are some questions about where does the money come to make that happen, where is that location. To deal with the interim storage sites and the final repository more broadly, the report recommended a consensus-based approach rather than just pick out some poor culprit somewhere like Nevada and say it's got to go there. As was done for the waste isolation pilot project, a consensus-based approach, as has been done in foreign countries. That's going to take years. Well, first of all, that's the Senate. The House right now is not on the same page. They may not even be in the same boat. They're using this impasse as a way to beat up the administration for pulling the plug on Yucca Mountain. They want to see Yucca Mountain resurrected and put back on the table. But we think that there's enough people concerned about the status quo. The industry doesn't like paying for casks that they feel the government should have taken off their hands long ago. People don't like having, like you expressed, don't like having the threat in their backyard. The government should have taken that away long, long ago. So there isn't, even though people have different motives, we'd like to see this addressed for safety and security reasons. The industry has some cost reasons. It looks like this is the right time. In addition to those factors, right now the Nuclear Regulatory Commission cannot issue a license for new reactors, cannot issue a relicense for existing reactors until it solves what it calls its waste confidence decision. That's holding up both of those activities. The industry does not like those impediments. So there's a lot of people with a lot of reasons to fix it. Not the same reasons, but we think enough of those reasons will force the status quo to be ended. The trick will be whether we get enough out of that movement or we just get the low-hanging fruit. That remains to be seen. Yes, ma'am.
Then I want everybody to think about the fact that, okay, they decide that they're going to move these nuclear waste casks. How are they going to do that? Are they going to transport them on our highways? And how safe is that going to be to any community community where they are transported. Are they going to transport them by rail? And the other possibility is that they will transport them by barge on our Lake Michigan